Looks like we're live. Hey everybody. Uh, this this is interesting. So this is to pull the curtain back. I tried doing this yesterday and didn't just record myself at all, which was hilarious. No sound. But today, I want to get started on a project that's been in my mind for a long time, and I want to use this to talk about different aspects of building software. This is something I've been at for a long time. I've worn a lot of hats in, so I've got a lot of context and perspectives on how stuff like this can be put together. So we're going to do something that's directly in my wheelhouse, which is we'll make a mobile app. We'll add some stuff on top of that, making it a cross-platform mobile app, and we will also primarily be working in Android because there are no Macs in this room, and as soon as we can start working with iOS, we'll either find somebody or if this is moving well enough, then we'll go get a Mac ourselves and start operating in iOS so we can show how these interact. But the initial build will be cross-platform using Kotlin multi-platform. And the reason why we are choosing to do that is because we are able to use the native UI elements on both platforms. Because what we are building is primarily a tool and not like a game or something that's going to have a very distinct visual representation of itself, we're going to avoid other platforms like React Native or Flutter. One of the other reasons we're kind of avoiding that as well is because I have less to worry about dependency-wise when at the end I'm still kind of working within a native environment. So if for some reason I can't do something cross-platform, or if for some reason there is a requirement that is 9 times out of 10 easier to do through the native platform, I'm able to do that quickly and easily until either my cross-platform solution can catch up, or we just stick with the two solutions because it's working and serving for us and we don't need to spend the extra time. Another reason why we're choosing to do it this way is because it allows us to work within Xcode, and for those of you who have worked in Apple's kind of development walled garden, are probably sitting here nodding your heads over the fact that, yeah, working with Apple is difficult when you try and do things outside of it. The multi-platform piece is pushing it, but if we're trying to do things that aren't directly done in Xcode, we have fun problems with certificates, we have fun problems with builds, and all kinds of other things, and if for some reason Apple were to make further changes to how their platform is handled, we're going to keep kind of running into these issues, and it's going to slow us down in the future. So for future proofing, for ease of development, and for just, general headaches saved by me, given that I am mostly an Android, Kotlin, Java developer, we're going to go with the thing that we know best. And some other time we can talk about like what the trade-offs are for that and why you might want to choose one of the other platforms. Because today is a product day, even though on the schedule it says today is dev day, we tried to do product day yesterday, but there was no sound. So we're going to push that to today so that we can talk about the project and like what it is we're trying to accomplish, and kind of give you a similar experience to what your own product team might be doing when they are working out what the new features are going to be and getting them onto your roadmap. So in this particular case, we're looking at a nice empty Jira board. What we've chosen is to do a Kanban board. Again, some of these will be a little difficult because I'm working alone, but I'll try and give that experience of what it looks like to work with a team, what it looks like to get tickets on the board and things like that. Kanban board's easiest to work with because it's just how often are you keeping things in a prioritized order, and really just need everything at a glance more than I need like a backlog and some of these other items, because we're working on something fairly low stakes. The project we've chosen is something I'm calling Feeler's Wheel. It'll probably have a better name as we go along, but all projects get fun working names when they start. the concept for it is based off of this. And this might be something you've seen before. Let's see if we can make this a little bit easier to take a look at. What this is supposed to help you with is assigning meaningful feelings related adjectives to your current state. Something that I personally struggle with is explaining how I am feeling. When I'm asked, I usually say what I'm up to or what I'm doing and hope that that kind of gives view into what my state is. But that's not particularly helpful, because if you are in like a let's not use normative, but if we're in different states and we're not understanding why, well, what I'm doing probably isn't going to help with that understanding. But if I can assign words that have meaning as feelings to them, then we can start exploring from there. So, and this is going to be important because we're going to work on our one pager, so it's important to explain all this and then try and like put this all together. For example, if I were to use this as an individual, I can start from the middle, and I would pick one that fits for how I'm currently feeling. So let's go with sad. So say that I am feeling sad right now. Now that's helpful in context for other people to like maybe understand how they may, behave around you given your current state, or if you are open to being helped, ways that they can do that. But if we can go a step further, then it can help further other people's understanding and even your own. So while I may be sad, there's a big difference between that middle wheel and then the wheel outside of it. So I may be sad, but am I feeling, despair? Am I feeling vulnerable? Am I hurt? These words help further place where the emotion is coming from and kind of where you are in terms of your own state. So if I'm feeling guilty, like that's helpful to know. There's a lot of reasons to feel guilty, and that can help you identify possibly what you're feeling guilt over. And if you take that a step further, we can take a look at the outer ring and then maybe assign yet another more descriptive adjective to how we're feeling. So if I'm guilty and I'm feeling abandoned, is it because I have guilt over the abandonment, thinking that I'm somebody who is just worthy of being abandoned, and I have a lot of guilt associated with that because that's what happens. Like, those are very powerful connections to make on your emotional state, and it can help when you are seeking help, or it can help with you self-identifying to say, okay, I'm guilty because I'm feeling abandoned. Where do these feelings of abandonment come from? Why is guilt associated with that? And it doesn't mean that you just have to go, center, middle, out. You can select multiples of these to help you understand the state you're in, which helps you then see what's behind those emotions and make decisions on how you want to handle them, or what you want to do, or even just at the very least like understand why. So the purpose of this is to make tracking these type of things much easier on an individual. And what I believe would help with that is a mobile application, because it's in our pockets, and because it's a simple tool that just requires users interacting and then creating logs based on that. I feel like a mobile app will be easiest and the most easy to get someone to come back to. The idea is that I would lead the user down a journey to start from the center and then move outwards, and then when they are done selecting those items, putting some context to them with like a small journal entry or something like that. So throughout the course of a day, if you are noticing that a situation has left you feeling a certain way, then you could mark that down, add the adjectives to it, and add context to it. And that would help you identify what's making you feel that way and hopefully give you some ability to mitigate that, because feelings can be extremely overwhelming. So that's kind of the tool we're trying to build here today. And that is what the project will be. In terms of design, it'll probably be pretty rudimentary. I am not a great designer. I understand, user experience and working through that. But as a designer, I grew up with Windows 95, so a lot of my stuff has blue gradients that look like the install wizard. We'll probably find somebody to assist us with design and talk more about that as we go. But if we can get a tool that's working, then we can commit to something called the MVP, which is a producty term for the smallest thing we can put together that is releasable, such that we can start getting user feedback and use that to influence what we want to do next. So MVP standing for minimum viable product, and that's kind of the aim of this first part of the project, and should be the aim of your teams as you move forward with certain features. They should always be the minimum that you can release, such that you can get data to then reevaluate your decisions and move forward with new ones. Now, one of the important things when building a product is the one pager, and what that is something that gives people an idea of what it is you're trying to build. So similar to the explanation that I just gave, but it's meant to be one page. So it's meant to be short, to the point, and accurately describe what it is that you are looking to do in this project. And this is usually because you're going to have to sell it to somebody other than yourself. Of course, everything I think of for myself is the best idea ever. However, not everybody is in my head, nor can they see why I think these things are true, especially not from the start. Like, even with the explanation I gave, we still don't have anything on, like, how do we interact with it, or like what are future things that could be done. There is a method of putting stories together called story mapping, where we figure out what that MVP is that I mentioned earlier, and we cut out the things that are not required to hit that, but those things are also of interest because that shows you're thinking of how this might grow. So while we want to think about, like, what's the minimum we can do right now, as a product owner, we also want to think of what the future is. And I've learned this. I have a good friend of mine who's a product owner who worked in startups, and the way he described it was thinking about what the next 6 months looks like, because that's when you're looking to re-up funding. So you always want to be looking at, what the near future is, but you also need to know what the post-release looks like, so that you can continue to convince people, yes, the project has legs, yes, there's more than just what we're doing, and more that it can do to serve people and generate interest and continue, like, evolving. Now, to be realistic, the evolution isn't infinite. There's always a moment where a product will either grow too far outside of its purpose and then become multiple projects, which is entirely fair. There's also the point where it gets to its usefulness point, and this, like, inflection where we don't really want to improve further on it until something utterly disruptive happens. And that's fine too. We can put the project into a maintenance mode, we can make sure that it continues to work, and that users are able to continue to interact with it without having to just constantly think of new things that it needs to do. If it serves its purpose, then we shouldn't be wasting time trying to think of ways to make it further serve its purpose. If people are happy and nothing disruptive is happening in terms of, like, technology or just our own ability to maintain it, then what changes need to be made? So, with all of that, let's talk about what a one-pager might look like. And I've got a little document up here to talk about what this might be. I am using a article from Jackie Greenfield, which I'll link somewhere, to say, like, this is what a good one-pager might look like. This was also something I have done in my past to pitch large-scale technical debt projects to our stakeholders, to say, hey, here's the reasons why, this is why it's important, and here's what we want to do. Sometimes this is done after like user research is done. The idea being that you you kind of want to know that this is something that might work, and you want to do some modicum of research to say, yeah, no, like the hypotheses we're coming up with are valid. Like they do have an interest and they do have outcomes that we can actually action on. So, in my case, what we've done for this is uh, I've just talked with people about what the application could do, and that's generated enough interest amongst folks to say, oh no, that would be something interesting to use, or I can see why a tool like that would be helpful. And some people have also just shown interest in general to say, I would love to have this be a tool that I use to work with other people to help them out. So the idea has enough legs, at least in my small amount of research, so we're already in a good place. Um, oh, yes. They also mentioned John Cutler in this article. He is someone I've had the chance to work with, somewhat indirectly, and yeah, definitely another good resource for if you're interested in ways to handle a product organization. So let's get started. The first section they mentioned to do is the hypothesis, so let's do that. And for me, a hypothesis should be a one sentence thing. One of the many terms that I've used throughout my lifetime is that if I can't explain it in 1 second, or excuse me, in one sentence, I probably don't understand it well enough to run with it and further describe it. So in this case, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and how does this solve it? So in my case, this would be for Feeler's Wheel. I believe that it is a tool that will enable users to better understand and assign meaning to situations in their life through an emotional lens. That sounds way more flowery than something where you pick emotions and then give context to them. But when you're trying to build something to present to somebody, you want it to sound exciting. So always remember that half of your time as a product owner is very practical, data focused, and like culmination of your own experience with the product and the users. And then the other half of it is telling an interesting story to get people on board with what you're doing. And those are two very different skill sets, so it's worthwhile to work on both of them in order to be successful. So in this case, we want to say our hypothesis is that Feeler's Wheel is a tool that our users will use to give context to their current state by utilizing adjectives that describe emotions. Yeah. Something that this article suggests is how we will know we are successful, and that's good. That's a way. Measuring success is an important thing to know, especially when you start getting into established products. You've probably heard of OKRs, you've heard of KPIs, you've heard of other 3-letter acronyms that are meant to measure success. They usually give you like a bad, average, and unachievable case. In terms of OKRs, which stands for Objective Key Result, what I have done in the past is aim for what a 30, 70, and 100% success rate looks like. The idea being we aim for 70 because that's achievable. So like that's what we believe is an achievable result, and that 100% result is something that we don't think we can achieve at all. And the reason for that is because if we do hit the 100%, that could mean one of two things. One, we didn't do enough to kind of like realize what we had or what we were dealing with, um, or we've hit something bigger than we could have ever imagined. And both of those are okay. What it just means is we use that as data going forward to set different goals that we can hit, and that's really the crux of anything in software development. It is, how do we keep using the data that we are receiving to continuously change and adapt to the situation we're in. I think I also want to make an aside on this, that it's not meant to be where we're rushing constantly to do this. I think that's one of the follies of what we call agile development, because agile usually means agility. Agility gets linked to things like speed or reaction time, but what it can also mean is it's just our ability to respond to change. And we don't need to be making snap reactions all the time. We're not built for that. Humans aren't built for that kind of rapid, constant movement. So when we talk about agile and we talk about our responses to change, we ensure that we don't lose nuance, that we aren't just, oh, something's changed, now we got to change as well. It's more about, yes, change happens, and instead of prolonging our decision, we do what we can to get the people in the room that can help us make a good decision with the best information we have at that time. And that takes time. So please, when we're going through this, always remember there's time to do these things, and if you're getting pushed to move faster than makes sense, we're not really agile anymore. We're just, everything's on fire. And when things are on fire, we get nothing done. So, that aside, let's talk about what success looks like with this. And what I feel that success looks like is that someone is able to mindfully recognize what their emotional state is. And that seems kind of ambiguous, but again, from the premise that we will probably further write on, because our next bit is the target audience, it'll make more sense. So we can have kind of a vague-ish, but achievable piece, and then move forward with that. But again, like we're putting this together live, which is, a whole thing in itself. But once we get these things on paper, we can poke holes in them too. So it doesn't need to be 100% right on my first draft. Like, I can get this stuff down, and then we can change as we go. That's the whole point. It doesn't need to be right in the first place. So let's do that. So success looks like our users being able to more easily I can spell. Identify and I think that's a fair bit of success. So for someone like me, instead of starting a conversation with, well, this is what I'm up to, and more mindfully as I learn through the wheel, because that's something that can happen with this. As soon as I start assigning meaning and doing it mindfully, I'll do it more often. And it'll start to become more than just I'm angry at something. It'll start to become, oh, I'm mad. Like, I'm extremely mad. And I'm not just mad, I'm furious. For example, I'm currently on the job market. It's a difficult market. It's extremely difficult, not just for me, but for everybody. And something I've had to deal with often is being ghosted by companies that I've actually interacted with a person. So not just, send my resume and not get a response, but send my resume, get pulled in for an interview, and then have nothing happen afterwards. So it makes me frustrated and very angry and mad because I've been a hiring manager myself, and it's not something that I would tolerate. And I don't feel like that's fair or equitable to potential candidates. So, but what would have happened before is it'd be like, how are you doing? And I'd be like, well, I mean, I'm dealing, like right now I've just been ghosted by these couple of companies, so I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next and where else that I might be able to apply to. Now, some people may have context around being ghosted and what that might feel like, but for them, it could be extremely different than how I feel about it. But nobody knows, not even myself, because we're not putting it in that kind of context. So, that's why something like this, being able to more easily identify your emotional state, I feel is an achievable goal. Now, what is our target audience? And let's make this a little more fun. We're going to give this a heading so that we can have a look at it later. Let's get rid of this. There we go. Yeah, looking like a nice formalized thing here. And we'll give it a title of some kind so we can use the title text. So who is our target audience? So for me, I'm the target audience because I'm building the product for myself first. But in a real case, we would think about who this needs to target. Because like, even in a larger organization, we still have different target audiences depending on which context we're in and what project we're doing. So for one of the companies I worked for, we had a summer promotion every year, and the summertime for when it was scheduled is a time when people were able to go outside more often and do things. So we had events around people's ability to do that. So that was our target audience, were these people who were on vacation. It wasn't for the person who is working through their summer. It wasn't for someone who is, as this was an international company, it wasn't for all parts of the world because some seasons are not consistent across all of the hemispheres. So that was also not part of the target audience. So you can see where like a tool like this could be used by anybody, but what we're looking for as far as like who we want to target, it's also who do we think will get the best data from. And for me, because I want this to be a tool that people use to better themselves, then I want to talk about somebody who is currently struggling to assign those adjectives to their emotional state, who has trouble conveying what their emotional state is in a given time. And those would be the people that need this tool the most. So that would be where I would get the best data from, because they are the people in the situation I care about the most. And this isn't to say that this is excluding people who are able to describe it and might use this for other purposes. Those are fun, exciting requirements that can come up as part of building a product. They will have a different experience and will most likely be able to either adapt themselves to the experience of those that this targets, or will become their own target audience for future work. So you can see like how this one pager is trying to really focus us in on what it is we want to do. And the more you focus it, the easier it will be to describe what it is you want to build to your stakeholders. The easier it is to describe, the easier it gets approved. And then also, once it's approved, the easier it is to convey it to then the people who will be actively working on it. So you can see why what feels like maybe a bit of a tedious process to go through and identify all these things really does end up saving you time in the end, because you are now nice and focused on what it is you want to accomplish, and it helps you stay on that course when you are starting to deal with the fact that the world has a bunch of shiny and other interesting things, especially when data starts coming up regarding this project that you could also focus on. So that's why it's important to establish these things early, such that you can weigh everything against them. And again, we're agile. If for some reason something extremely disruptive comes around and has a huge change with what it is we're working on, we also can throw all this out and change to that. The focus helps us making decisions. The focus gives us something to work against, but the focus doesn't have to be set in stone. So, let's get this out here. Who's the target audience? The questions that the article brings up is, who are we targeting, and who might be a customer that uses this feature or has a certain kind of characteristic? And this is important to identify because this can go even further. The article itself talks about maybe we're targeting a premium customer. Maybe we're at a point where we're trying to make money on this so that we can continue to work on it. Or it could also just be, hey, maybe we're doing something for retention. So this is why this is so important to build a target audience. But in our case, because we're doing this for ourselves, we don't have monetization and other things to worry about. So who are we targeting for this feature? We are targeting this difficulty identifying their emotional state. As a tool, yes, we will get data that will help us help users more easily learn the skills to Okay. So, we're targeting a population that has difficulty identifying their emotional state. As the primary group using a tool like this, we will get data that will help users more easily learn the skills to identify their emotional state. Perfect. That's who we want to target. We want to target people who have this problem because they're the ones that will give us data to further make this tool better. Actually, yeah, let's add that in because that was a good line. Primary, we will get data that will help users more easily learn the skills to identify their emotional state and improve the tool. Neat. All right. What's next? Audience insights. Ooh. This might be similar to what I just put into the first one there. So, what are we looking for as far as audience insights? So, the article mentions usage data, customer service feedback, survey data, and other research. So most of mine is anecdotal, which is not always the place that you want to start from. You would like to build like quantitative or qualitative data outside of just anecdotes. If I were to do this in a more professional setting, something that would be important to do would be to interview experts on this. See if I could find time with either therapists or if I could go through. I know that there are various tools that you can use for use case testing. We could build there's a product called InDesign that I've used before, but we could also just do very fast paper prototypes and walk around and talk to people about it and pay them money for their time. Those are great ways to get insights and very low cost ways to vet out this idea. I would much rather pay $500 to get the opinion of X number of people than build this thing over the course of however many months and lose more than $500. I will most likely make the return on my investment if I find out that it's good, or I will waste less money if I take the time and find out that it's bad. So, in this case, um, because my audience are people that I have spoken to, I will mention that specifically. And then maybe in the future we can find another project where we actually, spend the time interviewing folks. So, um, our audience is built from the discussion of this tool. Have interviewed and multiple people of various backgrounds to see if such a tool would be useful. I have found a lot of success with individuals that work in health as they see it as a helpful data add to their sessions. And this is true. I've had life coaches and therapists that I've talked to about this say, yeah, this would be like helpful for the person to explore. Like the wheel itself exists. Something that would probably help with this insight also is to see if a tool like this actually exists. And that's research I've not done. But that's also something interesting when you are looking at like targeting the market, especially with the hypothesis. Because if the hypothesis is we're trying to break into an existing market, part of our hypothesis needs to be why we're better than what's out there, or what we offer different, or if we just do the same thing that other people do in a way that they just like better. There's always something that people desire, but when you're getting into larger markets, it would be the discussion of like, if I wanted to start a new Amazon, then I'm probably going to want to look at what I think Amazon does incorrectly, and then what its competitors are also doing to like be different from Amazon. And in this case, let's explore this tangent because it's an interesting one, and again, another like producty thing to think about. Let's think of something that works somewhat like Amazon as a digital storefront, but also is successful in its own right, like Etsy. So Etsy is like we'll just throw a naive piece out there for what Etsy does. It's a storefront that helps people, usually with handcrafted goods or like self-made, like the mat that I use on my desk at the moment for a mouse pad and for holding all of my keyboard and everything was screen printed by a company that just specializes in that, and they've been able to use that storefront to do it. Could you do something similar on Amazon? Kind of, but the discussion between the two of them makes it a little bit more difficult. So if we were to throw a definition of what Etsy does out, and let's do like a broad one, it's like, well, yes, they sell goods and services to people and help sellers interact with their customer base to get their information and ship it to them, similar to what Amazon does. But Etsy has a bit of a more personal feel to it because of how you are able to interact directly with the seller, and that has augmented into allowing sellers to make things even more bespoke. Whereas something like Amazon isn't interested in something bespoke. They want items that they can have on hand that they can sell and get to people quickly. So both are doing a very similar thing, but they're managing different niches, and that's usually where you find success. For another example, years and years ago, Barnes & Noble had a handheld called the Nook, and people in software development found a bunch of success in building applications specifically for it. This is a time when the difference between handhelds and like the handheld OS was a bit more disparate than it is now. But you'd have to think like there's an audience of people who really like that. Like even now, think about the people who use their Kindles all the time to read books. So imagine back then having an e-reader that was connected with a large book company. but also had the ability to do other applications on it. People made a lot of money by serving that niche of users. And to larger companies, that wouldn't be something on their radar because it's a product they don't build. And who is a part of e-reading? Not everybody. So you can see why it's important to do this kind of research and identify these things so that you can feel like you're working on something that is actually important. So again, like a miss on my part here would be, are there other services that offer something like this? Are there other services that do that? Because in the end, what we'll be building is something that allows you to select the emotional state by selecting those adjectives and then writing more or less a journal entry about it. Well, I mean, that could also be done through a blogging platform that has sufficient tagging. But, like, how is it that, like, a blogging platform usually isn't for that? It's for something like, what we're doing right now, which is describing things. I'm looking at basically a blogging platform right now in the sense that it's an article about the one pager, but it's not exactly like it's not exactly a tool specifically for that. Could it be used for that? Yes. Is that its main use case? No. And now we're talking about how we get into that niche. So, again, I would be curious, and I might actually look that up when we're done with this to say, whether or not this is something that exists. But at the moment, let's assume it doesn't, and we'll just keep moving forward. Again, we're agile. If we find out more data later, we'll figure out how to fit a better niche. So, so for our audience insight, yeah, we've built it around the discussion of the tool. We've interviewed, casually spoken to multiple people who think it'll be useful. Found a lot of success with individuals working mental health that see it as a helpful data add to their sessions. And yeah. So it's, what I'm finding from our audience insights is that it's either like a companion to something that people are already doing, or if they're feeling adventurous individually, can use to improve themselves individually. So for the article, it mentions things like user data and customer service feedback, survey data, other audience research, so all the things that we talked about before. But yeah, the insight here is just, people are interested in something that is specifically for this. So people are, that is specific in its use case of a describe their. Cool. What else do we have? Competitive insights. We kind of touched on that. To see if other people are doing something similar, to see if customers have it already and it works for them. This could be helpful if you're building a platform and you're competing with somebody and they're like, well, I would use your stuff, but this other one has X, Y, or Z. This can get you into trouble sometimes too, because like when you're really pushing to sell for something and one of the things you do is just agree to say, hey, no, we could totally do that. We could do that. You get into a weird space because it's like you're promising something that doesn't exist. And when things don't exist, you don't know how long they will take. And if you don't know how long it will take, it's difficult to retain somebody's interest long enough to be like, oh, hey, we built it. What do you think? Do you want to switch over to us? So it's a weird place to be in if you're not already servicing the person. It's something to be aware of. But what we want to do here is, there's really no competitive insights because I didn't look to see if there was competition. Most of what I have done is self-research through casual conversation. So let's talk about the next one. So like, what's out of scope? And this is one of the most important things in my opinion. So before we talked about how we use this one pager to like focus in on what we want to do, and that we use it as like a tool against whatever ideas come through while doing this, because the world is shiny and interesting, and when you start digging into it, it continues to expand with the more things that you learn. So understanding what is out of scope is extremely important, because again, we want to hit the minimum viable product. We want to get this out there so that we can start getting data back, so that we can start scoping what the next thing is. Some of this can be done after the fact as well, like when you start speaking with your stakeholders and they're like, well, what if it did something like this? And if you believe that that's not something that would fit within scope, you can state, okay, so that's out of scope for now, but we'll keep it in the case that either we're able to implement it later, or we find that that's like the next bit of user research we should do. Don't want to just agree to it just because your stakeholders are saying, no, this is totally what we should do. Like, it's not always the best. So, what's out of scope for this? I think for the beginning of it, I would like to, and let's do a bulleted list. This would be more fun with folks interacting. I wonder if it would be cool if this would be a cool exercise to do with like a group of people. So we'll have to do this again sometime. What's out of scope? Well, the easiest thing that's out of scope is any kind of tracking. So one of the things I've thought of that would be a fascinating thing for later on is the ability to see the changes in state over time. There are cases of what's a kind way to explain it? There are cases where your mental state can change as the seasons change. And this is real. Like, this is something that happens. Like, or even like here in Seattle, where I'm at, people suffer from seasonal affective disorder. Seasonal is in the title, and being able to see that, yeah, every time X time of year comes around, all of my emotional state trending is trending towards depression. Oh, okay, yes, that's because we're hitting seasonal affective disorder. Perhaps I should do something about that. Or if it becomes something that is predictable, so that it happens all the time, then it's coming. And knowing that something is coming can be extremely valuable. But at the moment, all we want to do is make sure that we are pushing people towards that hypothesis, what the success looks like, that they're more easily able to identify their emotional state. So while data aggregation can help with that in the future, what we really want to do is to just be able to have them be present in that moment, select those items that fit for them, write about the context, move on. So we're not going to be doing any fun charts or data is beautiful type things, but that would be something good in the future because people like cool representations of their own data. What else is out of scope? Online storage. So this is more of a preventative cost thing for me than it is anything else. It's been a while since I've had to do like a cost benefit analysis on storage usage on something like, say, AWS or Firebase to just like store all of this. While this would be something helpful for users in the future if they wanted to use something like this across more than one device, if later there was a website that helped out with like managing this data, because on a website there's a lot more tools and freedom to do like fun data aggregation things, then online storage would definitely become something important. However, for the purpose of this, we're not going to consider that. And one of the other like larger reasons for this is the fact that this data is pretty sensitive, and the implications of storing something like this online and keeping it safe are much bigger problems that will become important when we need them. But building something like this and ensuring that the data is accessible on the device, not as dangerous. So if we have the data, we can ensure that it could migrate to an online storage in the future. Just be thinking about that as we model it, but not implement it. But really, the two big things are, I don't know how much this would cost to do online storage, so I wouldn't know what would be proper. I also don't want to deal with the security implementation to ensure the data is safe to my own requirements. Because, like I said, this is sensitive data, but you can also you can use data like this to be extremely manipulative. I mentioned the use case where you could see if your emotional state was consistent while seasons changed. As somebody who would sell things, I could take advantage of those times to say, oh, you're in a sad state. Here's some things you could buy, and I can use language to talk about how, oh, this will totally make you happier, or this will totally do this, or it'll do that. And I can try and prey upon your desire to purchase things in the hopes that it will make you feel better. I can also use this in the other case where if I know times when you are exceptionally exuberant or happy or feeling good, then I can try and utilize that to as the ambulances sound out how important this type of thing is to be aware of. It's also something I can use to manipulate my store page to take advantage of you being in a happier state. Some people make decisions faster when they're happier. Some people it is too for the short story of it, it's too easily gameable, and it's not something that I would feel comfortable with storing online if I don't have a way of guaranteeing to users that their data is as safe as I can make it be. So, because that's a bigger discussion, because there's a lot of things that need to be involved with that, and because all we're really looking for is just, does this tool help anybody? We're not going to care about online storage. What else could possibly be out of scope? Well, for the beginning of this, we could state that an iOS app is out of scope to start. The reason being is what I mentioned before. It's something where I don't have the ability to build an iOS app at this moment. I don't have the technology to do that because I don't keep a Mac in my home, so I can't build both of them concurrently. That may or may not matter for something like this. So, I'm trying to think of what else might be out of scope for this kind of project. It may be just those two things, because those are pretty big features that are, would be probably very successful, but at the moment, not important. And that's what you want to convey here. Maybe there's stuff that could be done in the future, but not important now. And then, like I said a moment ago, this would be an interesting exercise to do with multiple people, because this is something that is of interest. So more keeping track of all these things that are out of scope. We can continue to add to the list as we go. It'd be good to track them because they can become use cases in the future. So we'll just leave anything else here, and we can come back to it. As always, agile. Interesting. So Greenfield suggests to do rationale as a part of this. I like what they've put here, which is it's pretty clear by this point what the reason is for building this, but sometimes they find it helpful to explain the rationale, especially if this ties to goals or OKRs that aren't clear at a glance. And that's like huge. That's something you should always have in your back pocket, is whether or not something being suggested fits in with the company's current goals or OKRs. Because in one case, sometimes it can be a very easy way to not have to do something, which extremely important thing to know. In the other case, it helps you mold and change what people are coming up with to ensure that it still fits with your laser focus. Because if our company's OKR was, hey, we need to focus on tools that help people with their emotional state, and somebody started pitching something that had to do with selling supplements for emotional state, we could talk about why that doesn't fit in with this goal, because we're laser focused on this tool to help somebody. That's probably not the greatest example, but it's something to keep in mind, especially when you're working with something that's like brand new and full of hype. Because as soon as it's the shiny new thing, it's just like we mentioned before. As you dig into this, the world becomes shinier and more expansive. When you are the new thing in a company, you are extremely shiny and extremely interesting. This happened for a company that I worked for, where I was creating the first in-house mobile team that they had. And as soon as people found out that that's what was happening, product owners from all over the company were extremely interested in what was going to be in that mobile application, even though it's the first iteration of one built by the company itself. So we had to make sure that we were setting clear expectations with those OKRs. So I agree that this rationale bullet point is extremely important, because if you show that these are targeting specific OKRs, it makes it easier to continue to keep this focused on those OKRs. And if you're keeping your stakeholders in the loop for the same reason, it makes it easier to say no and go to your stakeholders and be like, please help me justify this no. I'm getting pushback. So this is also, like, as an aside, why you kind of want your product teams to be autonomous in like some of their decision making, because their responsibility is literally the product. So when it starts seeping into other departments, it makes it more and more difficult, because there's less and less people that can back you in a fight over what it is you're trying to build. So yeah, you can see why this rationale would be important. Unfortunately, we don't have OKRs because we're just Daniel. But because I've said this is important, let's see if we can figure out some rationale here. Let's try this together. So explain this, especially if it ties. So like it's interesting too, because the main rationale is to move this as a vehicle to be able to talk about all these different pieces. So it's not as much of a thing. So I might come back to rationale. I might fill this out later, because I'm not really thinking of anything outside of what we've already got. So we're going to stick with this. And this isn't, like I said, we're agile. We'll figure it out. And then the last bit of this is any notes. Like, this would be helpful if we were presenting this and then taking notes on it afterward, especially if we're remote, because then we can start taking notes as people start discussing things. But yeah, so let's talk about what we've come up with here. We've got our hypothesis that Feeler's Wheel is a tool that our users will use to give context to their current state by utilizing adjectives that describe their emotions. A link to this wheel would probably be helpful too, or embedding it into the document. But again, we want this to be one page, so we should probably stick with links. We can add that in later. Success for this looks like our users being able to more easily identify their emotional state. So yeah, that's what we want. Our target audience, we're targeting a population that has difficulty identifying their emotional state As the primary group using a tool like this, we will get data that will help users more easily learn the skills to identify their emotional state and improve the tool. So, yeah, we're targeting people who want to use this for its intended use case that are having difficulty, and we want that specifically because they are because like what it says on the tin, they're the target audience. Now, for insights, the audience is built out of the discussion for the tool. I, Daniel, have interviewed and casually spoken to multiple people of various backgrounds to see if such a tool would be useful. And I found a lot of success with individuals who work in mental health as they see it as a helpful data add to their sessions. People are interested in a tool that is specific in its use case of helping describe their emotional state. So that would be the user research that I have done and why I believe that this is a good use of our time. As far as what's out of scope, like we said, any kind of data aggregation or tracking, because really what we want to accomplish is use the tool, tell us if it works for you. Online storage for the security reasons that we mentioned earlier, which are I don't feel comfortable with storing this online until I have a way to, one, assess the costs, and two, ensure that it's secure because of how this data could be used if someone were to get a hold of it. And that's pretty much it. So from this, we would hopefully get approval to do the project, and then we can start moving on to what it is that we want to put together specifically. So, and throughout this process, we probably would have some paper prototypes or like very, very low fidelity flows that we could utilize to then start influencing the user stories that we will later write to work with developers to put this thing together. At the moment, like, there is nothing to view because it's mostly all in my head. But you would have somewhere to start from because of the user research that would hopefully have been done before. So then it becomes an interesting question, and this is something that as a product owner you can work with your engineering teams on, is to say, hey, these are the flows that we want, and this is kind of how we have delineated them. Let's start building something extremely low fidelity to test our assumptions, and then as we build out more high fidelity user flows, we can start making changes to those. And why that's a good process to follow is because the core functionality, so everything beyond from the view model beyond, are things that we can put together as the engineering teams and write tests for and mock data on and do all kinds of very simple things that are required while the other work is being done. And that parallel processing of it is nice because we're probably not going to change a lot of this functionality. And if we're encapsulating things properly, we should be able to shift them around if needed. But the big important piece of it is having this like front-loaded time to build the skeleton, to do very loose UI to get people through a flow, and to then add our UI UX on top of it, because people want to force these things in parallel. That's just kind of the reality of it. So what we do with that reality is we do our best to ensure things can keep moving together. I think another good example of this, which may be easier to swallow as a possibility, because I think the fear that I can imagine from moving forward with functionality without UX is having that functionality change because we've discovered something different with UX. And I want to make sure that that is an okay future to have, to say that that's fine. If we're doing it too often, that's something that we should be talking about in retrospective. But something that's a little easier to handle would be when you are building a new endpoint to deliver data to something. So if you have that clear separation between front end and back end, or mobile and back end, or so on, one of the things you do is you engage your back end team about what data you need and what shape you're kind of looking for it in, such that it's easy to, process the data, but also that it's the least amount if you're working in mobile, to make sure that you're not just taking over somebody's data plan, and all these other very important considerations when you're kind of crafting this API. But the problem is that when do you do that? Do you do that if you do that at the start of the project, then you are waiting for your back-end teams to put that together. If you do it before the project starts, something may change before project starts, and you'll need to change something, or how would you even know at that time that that's something you need? Like, that would require foresight on what the user story will be for the data that you need, which this one pager probably wouldn't tell you from the start. So you try and do these things in as parallel as you can. So what you end up doing is you agree upon the signature for the endpoint response. That way, the people on the front end can write a thing that looks like the signature and has fake data in it, while the people on the back end build the actual signature, and the two of you can continue to improve that and change it as need be until finally you link the two together, and now everything's already scaffolded to work. So it's the same idea here, is that we're building things with the intention of them being, encapsulated, probably grouped together in this fashion that makes sense, such that when the UX is done and when you put that together on the front end, the scaffolding's already there to support it. I feel like I've gone into a very different place on why you may not have UX from the start, and that's okay. But yeah, so that's a lot. That's a lot about like how to put this together, what it looks like, and why this one pager is so important. So the next thing we would want to work with would be user stories, and putting together user stories that are understandable by anybody. So I think an hour of straight talking is good enough for now. We'll leave it at this for the one pager, and then we can pick it up another time to talk about like user stories and putting them together. And I think what'll be nice for that is there'll be more dead air to give more time for putting these together and explaining why we're doing it, and maybe we can start getting to some other important things and then some dev work. So cool. Thanks. Oh, there's a hello. 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 Yeah. I was not expecting anybody to pop in. I hope I didn't leave you hanging too long, person. But yeah. So, for the friend that joined, and for others, I will post these somewhere. Oh, yeah. So I'll have this whole video posted somewhere. I'll try and make luckily my last name affords me YouTube channel names that could be the same, so I can find that. But yeah, this has just been me rambling about building one pagers and building projects. Like, is there it's funny, like, to be honest, I don't know how to interact right now. I'm so used to just having to facilitate things and talk to people until I get questions at the end. So yeah, is there something that you would like to ask about or be interested in? For anything really. Hopefully sound is coming through. But yeah, no. I'm trying to think of if I want to keep going and talk about something else. Hopefully, not taking my voice out. Yeah. No, I used to sing in a band, so talking at length isn't too bad. But I've also not done that for a very long time. But yeah, today we pretty much just talked about one pagers and project stuff like that. So um, I think the next steps would be, now that we have this one pager, to turn them into tickets so that I can start doing development work. Yeah. Oh yes, with Jetpack Compose, it's a little bit. It's still in kind of a funky space because there's some cool practices that Swift UI does really well. But with learning Kotlin, are you doing it? Oh, because yeah, you'd probably be doing it for mobile if you're doing Jetpack Compose. Um, I'm wondering what's the best thing. It would be to build something that you're interested in, because you need that constant interest to keep you moving forward. And it's hard too, because now Android is old enough to have like legacy stuff come up as you're like looking through different tutorials and things. I've actually been working with Android for the past 12 years, so I've seen it do a lot of different things. Um, I would suggest, like, yeah, getting the strong handle on like kind of the reactive nature for Compose, um, and trying to think of things in terms of states. Like, what state are we currently in? Yeah. Oh. Ooh. Ooh. So I've built inventory apps too. Um, so that folks can. I'm just kind of replying to chat messages. So the what's been mentioned is that there's a inventory app that this person's currently working on, and they do everything in Excel, and was interested in making it into a small app. Okay, so this is actually here. Okay, let's be producty about. If you want to keep talking to me about this, let's be producty about it. Are they looking to just like do regular inventory management, like they want to see what they have on hand and then make adjustments to it and stuff like that? Yeah, and it helps too when there's like a physical person that you can have a project for, because then you see them. Yeah, basically. Okay, interesting. So there's so many ways you could do that. Have you thought about how you want to interact with Excel? Like, is it that I think that would be like the biggest thing, because building, when it's a tool, like, your UI can be as lame as you want it to be, as long as it works. And especially for just doing inventory, like, you've probably seen the scanner gun. uh, they're pretty obtuse. So yeah, what is it that you've thought about as far as like where you want to store this data, or like how you want to interact? I might just pull stream chat over so that y'all can see this too, see what I'm answering. Local DB, excellent. um have you, oh yeah, with Realm too. Ooh, that'll be fun. So you're doing oh shoot, it's been a minute since I've done Realm. So that's, is Realm still SQL based, or is that still like, is that something else? Yeah, I'm looking at documentation for it right now. It's been a minute since I've used Realm. Most of what I've been using is I've used SQLite the most recently, but that was only because it worked with multi-platform. Ooh, okay, yeah, both of them will work. It's I want to make sure I don't just give you SQL advice and then it is of no use to you. So it's still very similar in how you deal with it. I think the big thing would be where do you put, how do you make sure that the data doesn't get lost on the device? So I'm wondering if you're doing, yeah, since you're working with Mongo. Oh, I don't know if you have to pay for Atlas or not. There's a lot of like cool depending on which one you choose, there are SDKs that will link between the two. And I'm wondering, like, that might be something to consider more than like worrying about like Jetpack Compose. I would have that be like the least of your worries, um, and mostly focus on like storing the data and then making sure the data is stored somewhere else as well. Because like you said, you've currently got it as a Excel sheet, and those usually aren't extremely interactable. So there's not usually an API that you can send to an Excel sheet. um, but yeah, like that's so cool. I'm so happy to hear that you're working with Realm. Like that's it's I remember when they started building that. So um, if that's serving you, like I definitely figure first like how you want to store things on the device. I would also, because this is a shoe shop, so these aren't like, they've I've had Mongo reps try and sell me on Atlas. The device sync is really nice because it's very intentional in what it wants to do, and for your use case, because it's a nice like contained one, it can be helpful. When you get into like larger companies that are doing things, and bespoke isn't a good word, but like their needs may go outside of something like Atlas. That's when it can get to be a little difficult. But it might be an interesting solution for you, because I would think one of the things that you would want is to be able to make this go to multiple devices. And in the case that the device fails, you don't want to lose all of that data that you just created. So that might be, this will start blowing up your scope like really big. So if there's it if there's a way, like if you work out your local solution, I would consider like your next solution being like, how do you store this somewhere other than the device? But have you looked into like barcode reader stuff as well to see if you can just get the shoe, like I'm sorry, I'm asking leading questions. Um, like what are you considering for entering inventory? Like what is it that you thought of as far as like putting that together? Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because it's that's always the thing with like tools that you're trying to get people to use, is how easily can you either get their existing data into it, or make it so that it's easier for them to just redo it themselves. But no, that's fascinating. Um, but yeah, like if it if it's interesting, uh, like I would focus a lot on how you want to store the data and how you want to get the data into the device. So like Realm is a great start. Um, Thinking about like what that needs to look like as far as um, what your stakeholder is interested in for storing data, and then turning that into a schema, and like the smallest uh, but most descriptive schema you can, and then how it is that they will enter data into that schema. Because once you know how you want it to look, it's really easy. um, but yeah, no, this is I. These are the yeah, these are always the most fun projects. Like because they're not low stakes, but it's a little less uh, frustrating and timeline based than like a corporate project is. But yeah, because that's usually so. Years ago, I wish I had pictures of it so I could show you. I worked on a inventory manager for a data center, And the main issue we had was our primary user was a type that will openly admit they don't like working with computers. So when you have somebody like that, trying to get them to interact with a computer to do things is already the losing battle. So like, it'll be really interesting. Yeah, like it'll be very interesting to see for your stepdad, and like for the people, if there's anyone else that works on it too, like how it is that they want to interact with this and what would make it like the fastest and easiest for them. Because here, do you mind if I just like spew out a bunch of like things that might be um, problems to solve? Cool. So things to think about would be, so shoes have brands. So where are the brands stored? Is that something that the user has to enter every time, or is that something that you store that you can then give to them? And then like where do you get those brand names from? Because that's like, these are parts of the things that are really difficult to handle, and it can become a very like tedious experience if, so say we get a shipment of Nikes in. Well, they're all the same brand. So when I'm entering them into the device, do I have to do it every time? Do I need to type Nike out every time? Can I select it from a list? Is it a searchable list? Is it and like where do I get that data for what specifically they're working with? Where does that come from? Because so like I said, data centers, we had Cisco, we had HP, we had some other very off the wall ones, and then we had some that were so old that they didn't really have data sheets anymore. So like trying to manage all of that to ensure that they could just enter everything in is, it's a big chore, because you're like trying to trying to keep track of these things and make it so that their experience is easy, so that they want to keep using the tool. So that's like an interesting use case to deal with, is like where do you get the data um, for what is in inventory? Because like shoe sizes are pretty normal, but in the U.S. because this is because this is also fascinating. Like if you look on the tongue of your shoe, you get like 3 or 4 different sizes. So which size do you use? Do you need to handle all of those because you're dealing like, I get like, these are interesting questions to ask your stakeholder to see like what's the amount of data that they care about to ensure that they're uh, properly representing what they have on hand, and how do you update that? So like when someone makes a sale, how do you make sure that that comes out of inventory? Or when you get a shipment in, how do you make sure that that has inventory? So like those are fun use cases as well. So yeah, it's a lot of your time is going to be spent on um, how do you make this the most effective tool for your first user, and like what data do they care about, then what backs that data, because there kind of is a finite amount of shoe brands in the world, but it's ever changing. Like yeah, I've seen shoe brands come and go. So like how do you keep track of that? Yeah, and it'd be fascinating, because I think of like it's been a long time since I've gone into a shoe store and purchased shoes, but like there's at least 100 brands in there, unless they're like a special retailer, like a DSW or something, or somebody that only sells oh, what are the sandals I wear? Yeah, like a particular brand of sandals. So those are things that are interesting, and like, so here's some interesting ways to solve them. So like the mention I had for shoe brands, something you can do is you ensure that the brands uh, like if say we don't have a way of knowing what shoe brands exist, which is fair. Like I can't think of a way to find a service that says this is every shoe brand that somebody might have. Like that's something you sell to somebody to ensure that that's up to date, because you've got people that are constantly maintaining that. So what can you do? One of the things you can do is you can make it so that it's possible to add brands to it, and then when someone is trying to enter a new brand, part of the search is, or part of that bar is, if they type an N in, then it starts pulling up all the N branded shoes. And there's some really cool libraries, which I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's also a fun problem to solve, like as a data structures and algorithms type thing, to pull up what fits the user's input. So then what ends up happening is that as they enter more and more brands into into your inventory manager, then the list just grows organically. And then if they need to do future things, so if say it's empty and I have my Nike shipment I mentioned earlier, I type in Nike once, you might help them with formatting and stuff like that, but those are future problems you can solve. And then now Nike exists in the dropdown, so I can save that somewhere, recall it each time that they pull that page up to enter a new shoe in, and now the search bar accounts for a Nike. Comes up, user selects it, good to go. And then that lets you handle those like niche, unique use cases where, like, I forget who makes Yeezys, but say like you knew colloquially that Yeezy was that's the type of shoe it is, so that's the brand that your store assigns to it. That can handle that use case. You add that in, now it's there, and now you can find it. So yeah, like just the bar for selecting brands is a fun and interesting like thing to look at. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Like the name of the shoe might be another like drop down type of situation, because normally it's like the names are pretty static. But if you think of a good logical order to ask people for that information, you can do a similar thing as well. So like I mentioned before, that use case for equipment in a data center, if I start from the broadest part of the equipment, which would be its brand, and then allow the user to drill down into the other parts of it, then there's a lot of things you can do to lead the user into making their experience a lot easier. So like, so for Cisco, like Cisco does everything. Like there's so many Cisco products, but as part of, and this is when you start getting into like interesting database stuff, and these balloon big time. It's why I'm not a database administrator, because it's a lot of work. But you start thinking in terms of like, how do you relate all of that data? So here, let me. Okay, hold on. Let me do this. I want them to be able to see if you reply, because it's fun talking with you about this. And you can get me going for hours if you have more questions. Yeah, you start getting, like, some of these things start to get to be pretty crazy. But I don't want to discourage you from doing this. I want, if for you as the listener, pick up keywords as you go, and it'll help you when you're searching for these things, because these problems are like, they're very simple once you start looking into them, but if you've not had somebody talk to you about them before, it's rough because you don't know what to look for. But here, just for fun on this one, I'll show you this, and then something else. What else can I do here? Yeah, so like if we're dealing with like shoes, so the top level would be its brand, and then a brand can dictate shoe styles. And databases, especially on-device databases, are real fast. So don't worry too much about how long it will take to process these things, because again, it'll move quick. But you've got your brand, you've got the brand being the top level thing, which is nice because as a relation, the shoe style is something that can be related to the brand, and you can make that. What's it called in Mongo? I'm sorry, I got to use SQL terms because I'm forgetting the Mongo terms for it. But you can make a foreign key to that to say, hey, this shoe style is only for this brand. So that when you know what brand you have, the next thing you do is like, okay, what shoe styles belong to that brand? And then when you know what shoe style it is, if you happen to know further what possible shoe sizes it might have, then that's something you can do afterwards. Or there might be connected to the shoe style, could be like colors or other, like, it depends. Like, this is something, these are good questions to ask for your thing. Yeah. Ooh. Working in the, so okay, so it's because he doesn't have physical shoes. He's repairing shoes, making keys and sign. So you don't care too much about what's in there. What you care about is who it belongs to. It sounds like. So like me as a use case, I come in as a customer and it's like, please repair my shoe, and I've got some expensive shoe that I need someone to fix. So it doesn't matter, yeah, because I'm thinking in terms of like a Payless shoe store where you just have a bunch of crap on hand. But what you're interested in is, I just had a customer come in that wants a shoe repair, and I need to know who they are. Is that more like what we're talking about? Okay. So okay, so then yeah, so it sounds like the Excel track. See, it's like this is why it's good to ask questions in the beginning, because I just went off on a complete tangent when I should be more interested in like what data you're currently storing. But it's a lot of fun talking to you, so I'm allowing myself to go off in directions. So what that might, so similar type of thing, actually very similar. Just now we're changing the context, because now you care about like a customer and assigning them something that makes it so that there's a way to find them, and that's an interesting case because then say I'm someone who comes in with like 6 pairs of shoes. That can be a way of identifying who has them. So do you know if they currently have a way of identifying like customers uniquely so that they can keep track of like all the work that they want and stuff like that? Inventory only for buying, so the customer's not a party of the system. Okay. And is this, but it might come as a widget later on. Okay. Interesting. And is this for buying, so this isn't for buying shoes specifically? Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I might have to ask you more questions about what it is exactly, but like those will be things like the lookup, like in general, um, the lookup is something that's really important. And if there's a way to um, think about how you want to uniquely identify those, like that's big, and to make it in such a way that it's understandable. So it's templates for keys and so. Okay, so we're trying to we're trying to see how much we have on like just material on hand. So still kind of like a similar type of problem. So you'd still want to separate things um, in a kind of like, so again, I'm going to be thinking very relationally. Like a NoSQL database is not meant to have as many relations, but knowing the foundation for one can help with figuring out how to find the foundation for another. So you're still going to be interested in a way of um, identifying what it is they want and then fetching the data for those particular items. So like if we're talking about templates for keys and souls, so that would be the first thing you'd want to prompt the user on is like which of the inventory items like is a high what does a high level inventory item look like. So if we have keys and souls, perfect. So we can use those as ways of identifying um, relational keys to what they're looking for. Because like if I was looking at key blanks, like there's tons of key blanks. So the first thing it's kind of we're kind of in the similar thing with it's still kind of the same problem, just different items. So like how are we keeping track of what key blanks we need to have on hand? So still similar like issue to the shoes, but now what's nice, the thing that's nice about this too is that if you solve it for one of these items, you've solved it for all of these items because it's the same problem pretty much over and over again. So like yeah, you want to find like what's the most abstract term but still descriptive. So let's take from your last chat here. If we look and say, okay, we're just dealing with keys and souls, like perfect. As somebody who's in that space, I understand what both of those mean. So what are you looking for? Well, I want to find keys. It's like, okay, what kind of key? And then that's the lookup that you do to see if you have those keys on hand. And then the same for souls. If there's more information that helps break down what you're looking for, then you start with the most non-descriptive piece of it, in this case a soul, and then you move further and further down. It's like, okay, is this I'm just going to throw things out with the knowledge that I have about shoes. This may not apply specifically, but it's stuff to think about. Would be like, okay, I want a sole. I want a sole for a women's shoe, and I need need one for a size 10. So that can list out all of the different templates for women's shoes size 10 soles that I have. Yeah. And it's thinking about like, yeah, because this is, oh man, these are things that like companies struggle with in terms of searching for like stuff in their inventory. So don't feel like this is going to be too daunting to take on, because once like I said, when you figure it out for one of these items, you have it figured out for all of them, and it'll generally apply with just you use a different table. Oh no, like very very easy to think about. So like that's what you want to think of in terms of your data structures, because we're dealing with Kotlin, so we're in an object-oriented language. So like your data structures will be things like, okay, I'm dealing with keys. So what makes a key? And this is a good question to ask your stepdad, because it's like, hey, what does it mean if someone's like, I need a key? What are the questions that you ask them? Or for him or anybody else that's dealing with the inventory, hey, what does it mean? What does a key mean to you, such that you can find it in your inventory quickly? Because like I've seen like at Lowe's, they have like all the keys on a wall. You take a look at the head of the key and go, oh, that's template 1037 or something, and that might be an important search term because they're a domain knowledge expert. They know that. Yeah. Oh, perfect. See, and perfect. So like, cool. That's the first thing when they're searching. I want a key. Great. Do you know the number of the key? And you can start entering that in, and that's something that you can autocomplete as your list grows of what kind of numbers that you have. And this can be like an organic list, like we mentioned earlier. So if there's a new key when someone's adding that in, um, give them the option to add the new key, or give them the option to search current keys to see if it exists. Then each key has a hook, which is a physical space on the shelf. So is there a cool naming scheme that they already have for the shelf spaces? And if there is, great. Then like allow them to build like that, or like get an idea of what they name, what they've given as like names or spatial recognitions on it, so that you can also use that as options. So like if I'm looking for that particular key, I know that it's, let's say they go row 5 column 20. Cool. Yeah, that's where S33 24 43 43 is stored. So now I know in physical space where that is, so that I can go find it. And then also, like, as part of this, because you're keeping track, you can list how many you have left over, so they know they can go look in the back and see if they got one, or know right away if you're out. Like, that's really cool. So like those are, yeah, like that right there, perfect. Yeah, and a fuzzy search. Oh boy. Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, it because if you do it that way and you get that all together, that mobile, like all mobile, it just steals from web all the time. Like, just you can assume that that's the case. So when you get to a point where it's like, hey, I need more than just one person to be able to deal with this, and I need everybody to have the same database, you just transfer it to like Firebase or something, and it works. Like, it's, I say that like it just will transfer over, but all of this conceptual stuff that you've done, it'll just pop over there. You switch it out so that you have your local cache DB, and then you have your APIs that reach out to get the foreign storage DB, or the online database, and there you go. Like, and then you like, in something I would suggest at first, because you can get really, really into the weeds on this, is you start thinking about like, what if multiple people are making changes to the database at the same time and stuff like that. Don't worry about those. I would worry, like, if you can focus on making this work on one device with all of the proper like syncing and database lookup and all that stuff, just one phone, and it does all the things that you want, then perfect. Then you can use that as your example for when you turn it into a multi-phone solution. So, yeah. Oh man, this is really cool. Like, yeah, inventory is always such a fun thing, and I'm glad, like, because it looks like you've got a pretty good schema with it having the key, the number of the key, the hook it's on, the name of it, and then the price group and the description. Like, those are all cool things, and that you already got a fuzzy search. Like, that's, you're already ahead. So, no, it'll be fascinating to see. It'll be fascinating to see where this goes, because, yeah, it'll be really cool. Like, and it's gonna be so cool the first time it works on your device and like is actually keeping sync with what's in the back. Because then, like I said, if you can, and that's the other thing I would suggest. Just do it for the keys first. If you can get it so that your use case is working with the keys, then you'll be able to take everything you learned with making it work for a key, and then turn it into the other materials that they have, and like tracking that as well, because it'll be more or less the same. So just make, like, first test is, and you don't have, like, first test is whichever is the easiest to like put together. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm gonna try and be here weekly around this time for a couple hours. So like, yeah, please ask questions. Or yeah, each day of the week. So definitely ask questions or send messages or anything. Be happy to answer. But yeah, like I'd be fascinated to see if you. Like I said, get the key use case working first. Don't worry about everything else. Just the one, and you're gonna do great. I wonder what else we can do here. Fantastic. Here, wait, how do I? Can I? Yeah. Cool. Oh, weird. Why did it do that? Oh man. As you can see, I'm still getting used to all of the functionality I have for this. If you were here yesterday, you would have had a completely blank stream because I was muted the whole time, and that's totally something that happens. But yes, yeah, I'll be excited to hear about your progress. Let me think. What else? What else can we do? What else can we talk about? Maybe I'll write tickets. Okay. Let's write some tickets. I'm going to move the one pager over here so I can see it. And then, what is this? Oh, yeah, there's me connecting my accounts. Cool. Yes, for sure. Yeah, let's make tickets. Maybe I want some more time with that. I don't know. It's a bit. It is a little tedious going through each of these on my own, even though I've had to in the past. What else we got going on? Yeah, let's. I want to make sure I don't miss chat again. Hopefully I can catch this out of the corner of my eye. I think we're just going to write tickets for a minute, and then as I go along, I'll describe things. Let's do that. Where do we want to start? So we're writing tickets for this. We're going to build this so that you can select these things. Okay. All right. All right. Hey, field one. Wonderful. You always want a description. I know too, like a lot of folks will do as a blank. Sometimes they're pretty helpful for putting something like this together. So as a user, I want the ability to choose which kind of journal entry I want to add to wheel. Let's get heading one. Cool. Option one is, oh, I have this written down. I think the main thing that I really want to do, because I'm normally the developer in these situations, I don't have to write these tickets unless they're for technical debt, but I would like to convey to my developer and other stakeholder friends that this is a lot of work to put these things together, and when you see them done well, it's always it always feels so effortless. But the amount of time that goes in, especially with a new team, and if you're a new product person on that team, learning what it is that makes sense to the developers but also will make sense to anyone is it's crazy. So luckily I have been thinking for several days on this for what it is that I'd like to do, and have a lot of notes. So I may type those out and share them somewhere so that you can see kind of some of this background stuff, because we did the one pager, and that's fine, that's cool, it's a one pager, but what we didn't do is talk about all of the things that happen up to that point of making the one pager and how they can influence these tickets. Yeah, there's a lot. So let's talk about the two options that it's I am feeling. Option 2 is that just happened. So this might be descriptive enough. I want a page with 2 button options that are selectable. I'm feeling, and that just happened. It could be that this level of ambiguity is fine because, we've discussed before, I don't have UI for this, so it really just needs to work. And then later we can figure out what makes sense as far as a graphics or a user experience. But something that might help more with this as far as context is what though I believe it's called a Gherkin language. So you do an if, when, and then. And why that's helpful is later on we're going to write test plans, and test plans are boring. They're also even worse if you are unable to derive what the functionality is supposed to be. So something to remember is that you aren't, when you are doing your quality assurance step, you're not specifically testing how something was put together. You are testing whether or not the thing you said is going to happen will happen. It helps to understand how it was put together because that can help with troubleshooting later on down the line. But what you want to do is to make sure that the user flow that you've come up with, and then any of the other weird things you can think of as far as stuff to do on that page, also doesn't cause the app to die. So let's let's change this up. So like this is okay, but how about we use like Gherkin language here? So if I open the app, let me cold start. So what this is telling us is the app has been not been backgrounded, not started. So this would just be the first time I open the app, and then any subsequent times that I open it and it's been, for those familiar on Android, like it's been kicked out of the LRU cache or something like that. So I don't want this to be the first screen that a user sees every time they open the app, because I don't want things like a phone call happening or other items that will push the app out of the top of the queue, so out of context on the window, to then kick you back into the main page each time. So that's why this type of language is important, because it tells you it's from a cold start, that this is what they'll see. And if we can figure out like colloquial terms for different parts of this app, like landing page, then this is something I can refer back to as the project goes on to say, hey, when they complete this flow, take them back to the landing page. So you can see like this is just the first ticket, but there's a lot of stuff that you will be working from as far as context and like later verbiage from just this. So it's helpful to be mindful in the beginning. It's also why we do ticket refinement, to make sure that everything makes sense. So like if we open the app on a cold start, when this one's kind of lame, because then when the app loads, then show the user a screen with 2 button prompts. The buttons will have the following options, or the following text. So then we can just copy this, put it here. Option 1, I am feeling. Option 2, that just happened. Let's screw around with this because I like things a certain way. Then we can, because there's further things going on, so we have this line here. So let's also, if I select one of the options, there may not be a when for this because I have selected an option. So if I select one of the options, then take me to a blank page with the title of the flow chosen. So cool. So if you look at how, like, let's not delete this right away. So if you look at the difference in how these two things are written, they both do accomplish what you're looking for. And to be fair, this is kind of a simpler function. But because I am now working in kind of a like logical flow, and I haven't described any implementation details yet, also an important thing we'll talk about in a second, it's much easier to get context on what's supposed to happen. So that's why a lot of these tickets are a strong partnership between our product designers and our product owners, because we want to talk about what we're doing and what the flow looks like for the user's experience, So that's why we end up with language like this, because it's much easier to convey to other people. And it gives us a very clear signal on what's going on. Like this, because it's a simple page, yeah, this is enough. But when we start talking about more complex things, like what needs to happen on certain responses, like if this had to load something, and it had to load it from a server, there's a whole slew of things that need to happen in different states that are possible. And what we can do is refer to those states and just talk about what happens in each situation. And then what it also helps us do is realize whether or not the task is too large, and we can start splitting it into further tickets so that we're not just creating a monolith that will be a pain to test. So if I were to suggest, it's, even though it's kind of tedious, it's a good habit to do things like this. Like, this is a very good way of talking about what's going on. So let's get rid of this up here. Excellent. So now I know that I'll build this if the app's from a cold start, when it loads, show the screen, and then the buttons have this. If I select one of the buttons, then do this. And I feel like it's okay in this sense to have all of this in one ticket because it's small enough. Like, we should be able to build that out and do that. That's okay. If we had multiple people working on this, there might be more steps beforehand to build some scaffolding, because what we don't want to end up doing, so for example, say that I had 2 people working on this project, and this is the first ticket I write. The second ticket I write, I would need to be mindful about, because if I have somebody build a screen down the line and they're attempting to test it, there's a chance that they leave that screen as the main screen in the navigation flow, and then I come in and put my screen as the main screen for the navigation flow, and depending on when those 2 screens are committed, we can cause fascinating problems. They're small problems, because we should be committing every day and seeing these changes to our ecosystem, but which might help mitigate that. But it's still, you still get this weird collision of who makes the commit first and who gets their code in first. So like, you run into fun situations. But yeah, so like this is a whole thing for that. If I were working with multiple people, well, let's go from that. So like, now I have a ticket that someone can get started on. It seems like a pretty well encapsulated piece of work. We'll go through and refine it as we write more tickets and figure out what's going on. So let's save this. All right, that's feel 1. Very cool. And then yeah, all this exists here because I've got it connected to Bitbucket. Highly recommend, if you can, make your user story tracking system aware of the version control system you're using, so that they can stay connected. It's a very easy way to have some form of documentation, so that you can understand the actions that you've made, and connect commits and merges to the ticket and be able to backtrack if things go wrong. So now, let's assume that I have a team of multiple people, so I need something else for somebody to do, and I work with my engineering lead of some kind to talk about, like, what is something that someone else can do. Well, something we do need, and I guess these are all tasks. Do I not have bugs? Jira, I need bugs. Why don't I have bugs? Silly Jira. You might have noticed too. Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. Yeah, bugs. I like the moniker on here. I like to know that it's a bug, so that I know what to expect when reading the ticket. How funny. But you'll notice there was another issue type for story, and you can add stories. Sometimes it's helpful with a story because it's another one of, it's the same thing with a bug, where it's like, yeah, no, a story is something that someone writes to build a feature, and then tasks help because then you can look at them as like things that developers want to do, and if that works, like, this is the number one thing when working with any system. if that works for you, if the delineation between the two makes sense for your team and it helps you be effective, then decide on that as a team. If it doesn't, if we're in a place where it's like, yeah, everything can be a task and more or less should be because each one should have acceptance criteria and they should do all these things, then do that instead. Don't ascribe to what a person does just because they seem to be effective. Work to understand what they're doing and then see if that will work for your team. And always work with the team on that, because otherwise you end up with a lot of people going rogue and just, doing what they want, and then nothing works out. So yeah, this is why one of the core pieces of agile methodology is the retrospective, so that you can make these decisions and talk to each other about what works and what doesn't. All that said, I don't care about stories right now. I'm on a Kanban board, and yeah, we should be fine with tasks for now. If we need stories later, we can add them in. We're agile. So let's go back. Let's go back to feel. So the situation we're in is I want to be able to not have the other developers sitting idle. So as a product person, I can continue to create different things for the flow, and then when I talk to my engineering lead, we can talk about what can be done concurrently and what can't. So let's create that example that I mentioned a moment ago, which is the I am feeling page. I will do my best to stay consistent on what I call each of these views. Because I've had them as views, we could call them fragments, we could call them pages, we could call them sites, there's so many, we have too many terms. But it happens. So for I am feeling, so as a user, select the first step in the process of using the wheel, which is a top level choice of adjective for the feeling. Cool. And as part of this, we could probably attach a picture so that it makes sense for future us. Let me see if I can't drop a picture in here. Boot. Cool. So now future us can take a look at this and go, oh yes, the wheel, the part that I'm feeling. So you want to do as much context as you can without going overboard. Like, this isn't meant to be full documentation of what's going on, but it is meant to be documentation of what this particular task needs to do. So context can always help, especially when I'm looking at this, 6 years later going, why did we do that? So let's put our heading in for acceptance. And let's talk about, okay, so what are we doing for this? So we already know we want to use Gherkin language for it. Again, because this is in my head, it makes it a little easier to visualize what I want to do. I think next time when we do tickets with multiple people, we might actually draw stuff and see what we're doing, which can be helpful. But for this, if I am on the I am feeling, let's put this in quotes so it doesn't drive me crazy. Actually, so I know you notice I started getting specific on that, and that wasn't intentional. I thought that would be important, but what I realized is that I don't really care where they came from. all I care about is if they're on this page. So we're going to stick with that. Let's not add more than we need to because we want to stay focused on what this is particularly doing. So if I'm on the I am feeling page, then presented with the top level options for my option would be sad, disgusted, angry, fearful, bad, surprised, happy. Nope. Surprised and happy. Excellent. As buttons for my emotional state. So just so that they know they want it to be a button. Then, all right, if I select a emotion, then the next level of options for that selected. So I'm not going to type all the options out, but this will be helpful later. So then show me the top. Buttons for the top level. If select an emotion for the next level, okay, so we added some context in here, and let's see how this flows so far. So if I'm on this I am feeling page, I want to be presented with the top level options as buttons for emotional state. Here are the options. If I select an emotion, then show me the next level of options as buttons for that selected top level emotion. So what'll normally happen here is you'll have you'll probably have an Excel sheet or a document somewhere that'll have all this written down, and then we'll attach it to this, or it'll be in your preferred form of documentation manager so that it's somewhere. But yeah, typing this out. Let's not have that. Okay, typing that out in the story would be kind of silly because of just how many there are. So we can leave that up to the developer to figure out how they want to keep track of those, and they should be talking to each other to do that well, or asking questions about what might happen next, and that could then further augment the story. So that could be something that gets brought up in refinement. But for the moment, we want to do the last part of this step, and I think keeping it all together still makes sense because for reasons that will make sense soon. So then, if they select the motion, then they want to show that. and this is something I've thought about while putting this together, was that perhaps the middle ring is sufficient and you don't want to select one from the outer ring. And then something too, while discussing this, and this is why the relationship between product and design and the user experience is so important, is because of something I mentioned while I was talking about the project. You could be multiples of these at once, and it doesn't have to just be from each level on their own. Like, you could select more than them to fully describe what you are working through. So that's a choice that we can make here, to just do single, or can we do multiple? In the spirit of doing an MVP, it might be better to just stick with one at a time. And that would be a good decision to ask about and make, because now we've reduced the scope of what we need to do. It may seem trivial for something like this, but let's talk about it. So we'll start with the first one, and that makes sense. Like, we select one of the middle ones, and then that takes us outward. And now we're given, what is it? For angry, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 8 options that we can choose from for the angry part of the selection. So what we would need to do is to figure out either a user experience where they can select multiples of them, and then track multiples of them through each of these selection layers until they reach the end of it. Or we can just pick one at a time and show those as like singular pieces of the state as well. Because when you're picking one at a time, it gives you a very clear breakpoint of when to update the state, as opposed to, okay, well, I want to select let down and frustrated, but maybe I don't want to select let down, so I won't need to be able to handle these updates to the list. Again, these sound very trivial from a dev perspective, but if you can see what it's like in the small case here, it helps you when you're having to describe this as like a feature reduction in the larger case. Because imagine that each of these had to make a call to the server. Like, we would probably want to figure out a way to make it so that it doesn't. So that requires a caching layer of some kind, so that when we're done, or a buffer, or what's a proper term for that? So, in other words, we would need to think of something that keeps track of all this until we're done, so that we're not just continuously making different calls to the server to keep sending things up or down. So, like, you can see how quickly we can kind of balloon outward if we're doing more and more things, or making more and more selections, and what decisions we need to make from an engineering perspective to, like, build that feature. So, I think we're just going to stick with single selections, and then if later on we decide, oh, actually I want to be able to pick more from each of the rings, then we can do that later once we have the proof of concept that we just do it with 1 and 1, or 1 and 0. So yeah, it's, in my opinion, it's easier to do the single case first, and like we were just discussing earlier, like, focus on one of these use cases, make it work, and then we can focus, like, that can be utilized for the others, and we can use our learnings to augment it as we go. So I think we're just going to stick with this. Actually, yeah, we're going to just stick with this, and we're not going to allow the option to skip. So if I'm... for lack of a better name, we'll call it the journal entry. Cool. So yeah, now we have it. So if I'm on it, then I want to be presented with buttons. If I select a button, then show me the next level of options. If I select one option from the next level, then show me the next level of options. And when I select an emotion from the last level, finally navigate me to the final page. So what we're trying to convey here is that like this is a flow that pretty much should just be a feature of itself, like the ability to select items from this wheel. And what's nice about this in retrospect, as I think about how this is put together, if you think of things like this, if you think of them in terms of like singular features, like one sentence things that have single responsibility, which is a principle, what's nice is that now, if in the future it's like, well, I want to be able to select multiples. It's like, okay, well, we've handled the case where you select one. Or excuse me, if I want to select multiple top-level emotions and go through the motions, it's like, okay, well, we've completed the case for selecting one. So once we're done, we can then restart the process and let you select another, and then let you select another and another. It's a old story, which I'll tell it because I think it's fun, about a professor trying to teach students about like computer programming and the importance of reuse. And the way the story goes is that the professor challenges them to write a program that makes a pot of tea, and then they together work through the steps, and they're like, okay, yeah, grab the teapot off the hook from the wall, put water in the teapot, heat the teapot up so that the water begins to boil. I'm not going to opine on how to put tea together because it's a very fraught way, but then the steps for how you would put your tea together, if you're a milk first or tea first person, or no milk, and so on. And then enjoy your tea. So then what the professor does is challenges the class, like, okay, now write me a program that makes a pot of tea, but the teapot is in the sink. And because they're all new to programming, what they do is they go, okay, and then they pull the teapot out of the sink and then fill the teapot with water, and then they do like so on and so on and so on. And so the professor looks and goes, no, here's what you do. Take the teapot out of the sink, hang the teapot on your wall, run the teapot from the wall program to make tea. And it's the same thing that if we're mindful about how we're building this in the first place, that'll help us in the future to build whatever else we want. This is, if I wanted a flow where I could select multiple top level things, then okay, yeah, I just rehang the teapot on the wall and run the, select the top level one again and send them through the flow again. So now I have all of this. Together, and it's very easy to reuse. So thumbs up there. And then we'll just have them navigate to the final page to make sure that that's all taken care of. So let's save that one. Field 2, look at you existing. It's all come together. Now, let's talk about that situation I mentioned a moment ago. I've got the landing page for selecting a journal type, and I've got the I am feeling page. Now, could these be worked on concurrently? Yes. You could have two people working on those separately. You could end up with the situation I mentioned before, which was one person gets their commits merged into main before the other, and then the other person needs to react to that. Or you could have it so, both of them have merged PRs up at the same time. They get reviewed, and then they start to merge them in. So let's assume that we merge the landing page one in first, and then we merge in the I am feeling page, and we forgot to change the I am feeling page to not be the main page that shows up, because that's what you would do in an Android app so that you can see your page, run it on the emulator, and make sure it's working. So now we have a bug because we have switched from the landing page to the feeling page. Not a big problem to worry about, but something that could come up. Um, so, like, what are ways that we can mitigate that? Well, the easiest would be recognizing that these two pages come one after the other. So you would work with whoever's working on it to say, hey, I'm at a point where I can stop. Um, will you wait for my pull request to go through first? Oh, that's funny. I've never seen it do that before. Oh dear. Okay. Anyway, yeah. You could communicate with your counterpart to say, hey, I'm almost done with the I am feeling page. How close are you to getting a pull request up? Or do you want to wait for me to merge mine in so that you can then put my stuff in as part of your flow? Perfectly reasonable. Or you can start to find like things that are associated with it that would not affect the flow of the first one. And this is when we start talking about splitting stories up into serviceable tasks. And that will come with that can come with refinement so that we can split them into smaller tasks. It can also come during planning so that we can talk about what could be done first and is committable with the team before we start implementing it. And that's why planning is very important. For now, we could do, like I said, we could do these concurrently. It's okay. And we'll keep them that way until we get to a point where we're actually talking about what it is that we want to work on. So, what else do we need? So we've got the selection for the journal type. We have the I am feeling page. We could go the extra mile and link the two of them together or block one with the other so that it's very apparent that, one needs to be in before the other one is. All kinds of stuff like that. Like Jira will let us do that if we wish. But we're going to keep moving forward. Let's build the other page that I'm thinking of. And this flow is the... that just happened. Yeah, I'm sure it's great. Oh, Jira. I need to turn the tutorials off. I have used you for over 12 years. So, the That Just Happened page. So, as a user, I would like to be able to, not the person, describe my situation first, and then assign emotions to the situation afterward. So this idea came from, because at first what I was thinking of was like using this in the moment and like what you were feeling and assigning that and writing context. And then I realized, well, sometimes in the moment you're not feeling just one thing. Sometimes you're feeling a multitude of things. And what can help is if you were to be able to describe it first, then add the emotional context afterwards. So, like this might become an interesting discussion because what I'm realizing is that some of our things aren't as reusable as we had hoped. This is why when you write things like this, you start talking about like what it is that you want and the reasons for them and what the flows are. So it'll become apparent as we go. So I won't get too far ahead of myself, and let's start talking about it. If I have... So if I've selected That Just Happened on landing page, I wish I could do what I can do in IntelliJ and just highlight that and put quotes around it, but that's not how it works. Then And what I'm realizing is it's just the first use case, but in reverse, which kind of cracks me up. But that's just how product development goes. Sometimes you realize that you're doing the same thing twice, but they have very different feeling flows when they're utilized. So, let's see here. I want to be taken to the box to enter the journal entry. If I and now this is actually an interesting thing because something we need to worry about is what to do when the journal entry is empty. Do we care? Should it be allowed to be empty? Should we instead, should we enforce this? And I believe for my use case initially, yes, we should. So text box to enter a journal entry and a button to next to the motion selection. Text into the box, and I hit the button to advance. Then take into the top level motion selection. If I leave the text box empty, then I advance. So at this point too, you might have either you'll have the error message explicitly listed in the ticket. You might, if you are working on a larger system, have a design. Pardon me. Have a design system that would allow you to just have general error messages, and sometimes that's helpful too. This is especially helpful if you're later doing translations or if you're trying to keep your error messaging between your website and your mobile app the same. Unity of user experience is a very important problem to solve. So that's a thing. How funny. I wonder. I'm interested. These are old accounts that are trying to post weird messages about cheap viewers. Interesting that okay, so this is let's talk about user experience real quick because this is important, and this is why it's so important, and why as a developer it's good to be aware of this. And if your platform of choice has a design language, so for myself, because I work in mobile, Android has a design language for material design, thank God. They used to not. And then iOS, or Apple in general, has the human interface guidelines, and they're important flows to know, but something fascinating about this. So let's go through the process. So like this is the first person to say something on the channel, and not say anything afterwards. They have this here, which is obviously trying to get around text checking, and then whatever the heck this is, which we are not going to follow because we do not follow links. Don't follow links. But we click on them, and this is weird that they've been around this long. So very strange. And so to me, this is a bot. Or if they're not, then that's really silly to go around and post spurious links here. So I want to report this person because they're trying to probably send me to something that will allow me to purchase viewers, which is not good. So let's report them. If we're reporting them, so I think they're a bot. I'm wondering if there's other things. What else is there? Fascinating. Okay. Malicious pranks, revealing personal targeted abuse. Ban evasion is like multiple. Why did there be two? Fascinating. Cheating, harm, endangerment, slurs. I'm curious if there's something in here that's specific for what it is that they're doing. Sharing private messages. How funny. I'm sure, like, see, why would you have both? That's fascinating. Let's do spam, scams, or bots, because it is both of them. See, and this is the other thing, too. So, like, without it helping me on what these mean, it can make it difficult to know which one is correct. And I'm sure this is documented somewhere on Twitch, but I am currently on stream, and I can't be spending time to just look for that. So yeah, can you give us more information? See, and then now that I've selected this, now they're asking me for something specific, but I feel like it's this. Phishing links, malware, or information meant to defraud users, which, yes, I would assume defrauding fits, so we'll go with that. And then I'm reporting this for this. Tell us more. Please include a timestamp if applicable. So this is what's weird about this, is that I don't need a timestamp because it's in chat. And as a part of chat, timestamps should already exist. Like, that should be something that they're already tracking. So I shouldn't have to tell them that. There should also be other forms of information they can derive because they are the holders of that data. So this is a weird experience for me because, like, I don't know why they wouldn't have this already. Like, this is weird. So, yeah, that's probably fine. Then we'll block them because we're not going to do anything about that. There you go. And then also, it happened again with whoever this is. Best viewers on whatever the hell that is. And that's an LY link. Like, that's already reduced as well. So I don't even know where this will go, and I don't have a way of seeing that. So, no. And again, like, it's so strange. Like, this is an account from 2018. Same thing. Report. I just got an email from them saying, oh, hey, we got your report. Whatever. Cool. I wonder, yeah. I'm surprised the auto mod on level 2 doesn't catch those either. Like, although I hate my curiosity wants me to click on that link, but I also know better because I used to work in fraud departments, so we're not going to do that. But yeah, just that's a fascinating user experience because you should be doing everything in your power to make your tool as intuitive as you possibly can. Now I'm going to have like a big old aside about this because we were chatting earlier um, about like talking to your stakeholders to see what it is that they want to track and why, and then you start like looking for top level things that then help them drill down into what they want. Like I would continue to click through those radial buttons to get to what it is that I was reporting. That's fine. But when you get to the end of it and it's asking for things that I don't have, like the timestamp isn't accessible on this stream chat as I'm, at least from what I'm seeing right away. So that makes it difficult for me to add a timestamp. And yeah, that doesn't. It honestly, it's fascinating. It just doesn't make sense to me because the only timestamp they should care about is like when the chat was sent, and they can extrapolate that from when my stream happened. Like this is all data that they have, and they could do for me to make it so that reporting users is much easier because of the Herculean task of like moderating users. So, yeah, this is why like competent user experience folks are like invaluable. Like you can't just me naively going through that experience on a project that I did made it so that our customers were that much happier. Did I reduce clicks? Did I make it so that it was very apparent which step you're on and why? Like all of these things are just so important to make it so that users want to come back and use your tool. And unless you are the only thing on the market that does your particular thing, like there's no excuse because you have to be the singular thing on the market in order for people to just accept that that's how your thing works. So, end of that rant there. Yeah, let's talk about this. So, again, we're talking about the That Just Happened page. So this would be the case where someone wants to describe their experience first and then assign emotion to it afterwards. What this is just a reversal of the first one. And I think what I'm going to do right now, before I get even further into this, is I am out of anything to drink. So I will be back. Where is the notepad? Notepad. You can tell what things I've been looking up. Notepad. Be right back. All right. As you probably heard from the door, I'm back. Stay hydrated, folks. Especially if you want to save your voice for talking for hours. All right. So let's keep talking. So, something that we've recognized while writing through this ticket is that it's basically the first process just in reverse. And what the original um, what the original thought on that was supposed to be that you could describe your situation and then select multiples of the emotion. But the the funny thing would be you would end up with two flows basically doing the same thing, just one having one page and one having another. So it might be worthwhile to extract that particular piece and then make it so that it's reusable. So this is why ticket refinement is so important, because as a product person, I would look at these and say, yeah, I just need these things to do these things. That's why I want them this way. And it doesn't matter how they are done. All that matters is that they are done. Now, in some cases as well, it might not matter. Like, because you got to think about, like, does it work or not? Can I sell it to somebody or not? That's a very real thing. So having the two of them do the same thing just in different orders, it might not matter at this moment. What might matter is just whether or not it gets done so that it can accomplish this thing that you're interested in. So what can happen and what is important is like trying to have as much of this together as you can so that you can be aware of when reusable items come up. And that's why, again, that's why refining is important, because other people will see things that you don't. And the only reason I saw this was because I'm actively speaking through it. But when you're working, you're in the zone. You're like, I got to get this many things done for these notes. Here's what I got. So, yeah, that's how that kind of ends up. And then this is also why planning is important, because we could come to this point and see these things and just accept it happens. We may see this ticket days after the first one and not remember. There's a lot of things we got to do in a day. So if both of these items are currently in our next, like grip of work, then it's important to look over these with your peers when you're planning, because then the hope is that somebody will realize, wait a minute, one just has one flow and one has the same flow but backward. So what do we do? And it's like, oh, well, then we have one person write something that just does the feeling flow, and then for the other people, they can just do the journal flows as it matters. Neat. Okay, so we've just saved ourselves however much time rewriting this twice. So it's a good thing, it's a good thing to try and advocate for planning. I know, and trust me, I know that it never feels like planning is important. It just, you just think that, well, if I could just get to the keyboard and get going, I'll have something and then we can go from there. But you miss out on a lot if you don't take a couple of minutes to just kind of think about what's going on. And for me, it's to the point where I actually do have a plaque on my desk, and it's one of those that has like a clock embedded in it for some reason. The clock is broken, which is even funnier, and it says, "Weeks of programming can save you hours of planning." To remind me that, yes, you should take time to plan. You should take time to sit down and think about what's coming next, and it really does save you a lot of time in the future. So this is a fascinating thing that can happen here. Let's leave this the way it is, and then when we get to the dev steps of working on this, we can talk about what a flow like that might look like, and what are options for when you want to action on that. So in total here, let's see. So let's talk about this ticket, make sure it's good enough. if I've selected that just happened, I want to be taken to this page with a text box, and then I want to see it. If I enter text and I hit the advance, take me to the top level. If I leave the box empty, when I hit the button to advance, show me an error. So, oh, that's fast. So other behind the curtain stuff that's kind of neat. I reported those 2 bots, and they've already been removed. How fascinating. It's just, yeah. I'm probably going to do that a lot. I evaluate the systems that I use quite often because of my experience. Interesting. Anyway, so yeah, this is something here. Actually, something interesting to highlight with this. This is very interesting. So we have an error state on this, which is if you leave the text box empty, then that's an error. So now, hopefully what that's showing is how important it is to handle these states in like an explicit way. Because I want you to think as a tester now, or I want you to just think in general for when you yourself complete this work and want to validate that you did it or not, which is easier? Is it easier to see like states that you're supposed to be in, like where you start and where you go, or would it have been like the first thing we wrote where it was just a long explanation of like what it is? And I can tell you from experience, it's this is the easier way. Because now, when I write a test plan for this, it's basically just kind of what's in this acceptance criteria, and then whatever else I can think of as far as testing. And that becomes part of a later smoke test system, perhaps. So if there's like a manual flow you want to do, then you've got the test plans for that so that you can make sure that those are tested every time. It can turn into your UI automation strategy, because this is literally a set of steps that the user is going through, so that's a way to test it. It can become a lot of different things when it's nice and explicit like this from the start. It's also very easy to understand. Like I said, I want the CEO to be able to understand what it is that we're building. I would argue that the CEO can understand this with enough context. So, neat stuff. Let's save that. So what else do we want to do? Well, we could work on what would a final page of this look like, or at least a way to see these. Yeah. So let's argue this one. This one will be interesting. Storing, and I'm calling it that to be silly because I find it funny to call it emotional state, because it is the state that the current user has. Yeah, so as a user, I'd like my journal entries stored so I can later see them. That very simple use case. But let's talk about it. If yeah. So let's do this from a different way. So let's just make this as then store my entry. So something about this that is interesting is that if we're not specific about this, like this can cause problems in the future. And again, this is why ticket refinement is really important, because as somebody who is trying to describe features, like this feels sufficient. Like, okay, I want the journal entry stored. I might even be slightly like maybe I've met product owners that have technical backgrounds. Excuse me, let's not say technical. I've met product owners that have programming backgrounds that end up like doing the product owner part more than the development part. So they may have an understanding of like storing things in a similar fashion. But the thing is that this is actually pretty ripe for discussion on how we want to store these items. And this is why it's important to put tickets like these in front of the entire team, even if for a brief amount of time, so that they can identify that kind of stuff. So, like, for example, I described before that the flow for, here, let's save this, because we'll need this ticket. We can always delete it if we don't need it. But, oh, I added it as a comment. Silly me. I'll have to pull that out. But that's going to annoy me if I don't. Oops. Paste. Save. Delete. Go away. Yeah, I know. Cool. So we got that. Anyway, so what we talked about before was that how the flow here for the I am feeling page, so yeah, you go from the center, select outwards, write a journal entry, is this just in in a different direction. So what that means is that both of them could definitely share their data structure, because what is this? In the end, it's a entry, it's an emotion, and then the child emotion words that are attached to it. But because of what future things might happen, it's worth discussion. As I talk more and more about it, you'll see that I'm starting to also change my opinion on like how this could be structured or not, and why I'm bringing it up. So the fascinating thing about this is, like I mentioned before, we're doing this as an MVP. So I only want to be able to select one at a time. So one middle one, inner one, outer one. And that means that they could share their data structure. But if I wanted it to be distinct and for it to only do one selection for the first option or the first flow, the I am feeling flow, and then multiple options for the second flow, you can kind of argue differences in data structure. You could also have them all go through the same data structure and just have it so that the I am feeling flow is a list of one, and the that just happened flow is a list of many, or one or many. But the thing that ends up happening with something like that is you begin to lose nuance. So you might have caught it when I mentioned what the that just happened flow could be. If the I am feeling page is a single selection, well, that becomes a problem if they're both using a list, because then if I'm looking at the data, I don't know which event it was unless I'm storing that somewhere, or if I'm keeping their tables or their schemas separate or something like that. Because a data structure that has a list for the emotions selected, if it only has one in the list, that could be either or, because I could do a that just happened and only select one emotion. perfectly valid. So now I've lost context on which one of the flows the user used to do that. And that could matter. Or it couldn't. We don't know. But it's an important thing to think about when you are putting something like this together, is how much of it do you force through similar flows. For example, I talk about this book a lot amongst in in many conversations, but there's a book called Seeing Like a State, and it talks about those times where more broadly things like a tree farm, like governments and other things like that, where things become generalized solutions, lose their nuance, and then fail spectacularly in interesting ways. And in how I was introduced to it was a use case where a company is dealing with like a multitude of different types of errors, and what they want to be able to do is to be able to work through them in a certain way. And what they chose to do was generalize all the messages, so force all of these like error states from disparate functions and services into like one specific error flow. And what ended up happening is they lost a lot of context on like what these errors were, because what they may have been building it from was serving a particular team or service, but for other services that were not built by that team or built before that team existed or have completely different use cases, now are losing things because the extras that they needed don't adhere to this new system. So it's something to think about when you're putting things like this together. Is how much of it is a single responsibility, how much of it is something that everything can utilize, and like what does it mean if everything goes through the same thing. So just fascinating design, like architecture design things to think about as you're going through and putting this stuff together. So yeah, well, I think that's good for a first run. Yeah, we got a couple of tickets here. We'll take a look at them more soon. We've got a one pager that we talked about, and we also did some impromptu design talk about like what's going on with Tobias's project there. So a fascinating day worth of stuff. Tomorrow we'll get into one of the other aspects of this process and talk more about what's going on there. So thank you everybody for joining, and I hope to see you on the next one.